Welcome to Urbanary, the podcast exploring how we understand and live urban spaces.
Urbinary.
Picture this. We are standing in front of Politecnico di Milano, our university, a place woven into our everyday lives. It's not just where we work, think, or reflect, but also where we teach, make friends, and spend idle moments. It's a place of routine and randomness, of encounters and tensions. These layers of everyday practices shape the university into a site of both connection and contamination, deeply intertwined with our roles as researchers. We are observing the university spaces, its buildings, public areas, and the vibrant mix of people who bring it to life. Young students filled with energy and ambition, professors sharing their expertise, researchers chasing ideas, technical and administrative staff ensuring everything runs smoothly, and even the unfamiliar faces of those simply passing by. Here at Urbinary, as we delve into urban studies, we are asking ourselves, where is our place? Where do we stand? Which direction are we heading to? So we begin a journey. Through this podcast, we will walk, inquire, and challenge the space we inhabit, asking you to make room for us. Over the course of 4 episodes, we will reimagine the space of the university. We will physically and intellectually step into this space, reflecting as a group on how we would rearrange it to better fit our needs and perspectives. This is our aim. Join us as we walk through a journey of self-reflection on our positionality within our university and our field of study.
Urbinary.
Today, Julia and I, Daphne, invite you to join us on our walk. We'll lead you into the first episode of this season, Finding Our Place, Rethinking Observation in Urban Studies. Follow our footsteps and discover what we have to share. Hello everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of this season and the rebranding of Urbinary. I'm Daphne Riga. I'm a research fellow and PhD candidate. My research focuses on the person-environment relationship during human movement, with the aim to address, inform, and advocate for alternative, sustainable, and slower modes for experiencing landscape.
Hello, I'm Giulia Oldani, a PhD candidate with research interest in warfare and conflict within urban space, and currently I am conducting a study on the role universities plays in the area where they are located, focusing on their social and territorial impacts.
We're excited to have you join us. Let's begin our journey.
Urbinary.
We are walking around Politecnico, looking around and reflecting about space. Observing what is happening around us is key in our field. As we walk, we begin discussing the fact that when we study an issue or phenomenon, or when we plan, we always start by understanding the environment we need to study or design. So we stop. We stop and begin observing. As we observe, we realize that in the field of urban studies, the observation and analysis of space is often approached through scientific and technical data. However, we start to sense that space is not just made of these quantitative elements. There is more. There are emotions, needs, feelings, and desires. There are cultural and educational backgrounds that shape the way humans live in urban spaces.
We start walking again, aiming to find where all these intangible qualities of spatial experience can be found. More importantly, we ask ourselves how we can detect them, understand them, and observe them, and ultimately incorporate them into the field of urban studies. We walk and reflect on our first experiences as urban scholars. But we realize that the intangible qualities and subjective experiences of people have rarely been addressed and explored during our academic training, through courses or projects, and so on. With this in mind, we asked Gabriele Pasqui in one of our interviews. In your experience as professor of urban policies, do you think that methodologies regarding the subjectivity of people's experience of urban space are sufficiently addressed in academic curricula?
Here the answer is very simple, it's very easy. The answer is no. I think that in our Polytechnic, in Politecnico di Milano, especially in our master course in planning, there is an attempt to take into consideration these dimensions. But I think that this approach should be internalized in all the experiences of the students in the workshops, in the seminars, also in the courses that we give for architects, for planners, for urban designers.
So we stop again. And we understand that we need to take some time to reflect on how we observe urban spaces, the tools we use, and perhaps most importantly, whether we are paying enough attention to the intangible qualities of our spatial experience.
Urbinary.
Our journey began with reflecting on the concept of observation. I hadn't fully understood the difference between simply observing, so just looking at something, and practicing observation as an attentive and intentional act, so really seeing and understanding what I see. Since others might also be unfamiliar with this distinction, and given that Daphne's PhD research focuses on that, I'd like to ask her to share some insight with our listeners to help better understand the concept of observation.
Urbinary.
So in order to talk about observation, I think that we first have to refer to some basic concepts that have to do with the person-environment relationship. Evidently, as humans living on this planet, our life is characterized by this person-environment relationship. When we observe, we relate to the environment in all sorts of different ways. But I think it is important to take a step back and understand how this process of relating to the environment really works. In this matter, it is really useful to adopt an interdisciplinary stance, and so to refer to theories developed in environmental psychology. So, the person-environment relationship can be understood as a process of continuous interaction. The environment is a system that is dynamically organized in space and time, and it includes physical, social, sociocultural, and symbolic aspects, but also ourselves, humans. We are also dynamically organized. We have needs, motivations, and intentions, and we are influenced not only by the physical environment, but also by the social one. During our interaction with the environment, that is also through observation, there is a series of different cognitive and affective processes that take place in our minds and our bodies in relation to the characteristics of the environment. That might be objects, physical features, events, and so on. Since we talk about observation of spaces and of the environment in general, I think it is important to make a clarification about terminology here. When we observe something, we usually say that we perceive, but the process is far more complex than this. Perception is not synonymous with observation. In environmental psychology, perception refers to our direct sensory experience of the environment when we are in it at a given time. So perception has to do mostly with our senses, sight, touch, smell, taste, and sound, but also with our bodies in general and how we sense the environment through them. In very broad terms, we can say that perception happens always, no matter if we consciously think about it or not. Perception is followed by cognition, which refers to the way in which we understand, structure, and learn the environment. It is generally more conscious than perception because it involves the element of attention and memory. For example, when we observe a space, we do not simply perceive it, but we scan it in order to understand what we see, what we hear, what we smell, and so on. So, we have perception followed by cognition. The last stage in this process is evaluation. When we observe a space, we usually make judgments about it in terms of its quality. Such judgments can be more objective and measurable. For example, we can say that a tree is green, tall, and old, or more subjective and emotional, like a park is pleasant and relaxing. But usually we make both kinds of judgments at the same time. So the park is very pleasant and relaxing because it is full of green and tall trees. And of course, all these judgments are not only related to the space that we observe at a given moment, but also to our beliefs, attitudes, and personality, which are shaped by the social environment.
Urbinary.
So, to sum up, we can say that observation is a very complex process that is highly fluid and subjective. and it reflects all stages of environmental experience, so perception, cognition, and evaluation, and it is influenced by several factors: the physical aspects of the environment, the personal aspects of the observer, the symbolic aspects of society. And in fact, when I asked Barbara Piga if we should consider the urban environment as a socio-spatial system, she replied,
Absolutely yes, in my perspective, even more than this, as I mentioned before, it's everything. I mean, it's everything connected. So it's also the perception that you have. So if you imagine that you feel unsafe in a given space, even if there is no one, the reason you feel unsafe is generally, in any case, dependent to the perception that you have of the social environment, even if you see no one in the place. So of course the social environment is super, super important, as well as the physical environment that contributes to generate some specific conditions.
I think her words really summarize the complexity of observing, understanding, and living within space. And I would like to add that we should keep in mind that our interaction with space is not fixed or static, but is rather a continuous and ever-changing process. For example, in moving through or visually observing a space, we also modify our spatial relationship with it, and therefore a constant shifting is taking place in which we, as humans, also influence what we observe in tangible and intangible ways. After all, in my opinion, the subject of study for urban scholars boils down to the person-environment relationship. For this reason, I think it's really important for us, urban scholars, to at least have an awareness of the processes underlying the person-environment relationship, and perhaps more importantly, to try to address the complexity of human experience in urban research and design. As Alan Jacobs says, observing and interpreting urban environments should be as valued a research and analytical method as any other.
Urbinary.
To begin our discussion about unpacking the reflection surrounding the concept of observation, we imagine ourselves, as urban scholars, as a sort of recipient or container. A container into which three main parameters are deposited during the act of observing an environment and eventually shape the process and outcome of observation. The first is what Lizzy Privitera in our interview referred to as
there's been a very mainstream way to approach urban planning that is what is called usually a positivist and deterministic approach, which means that actually there is a strong belief that we can grasp the reality through a total objectivity. So as a planners, as a researcher, we can understand the realities and the cities as something totally objective by using our rationality.
This perspective leads us to observe using quantitative data like measurement, statistic, sensor, and others, focusing on the technical and scientific aspects of our field, the measurable and objective components of urban spaces. However, as we explore in our interviews with Lizzy, Barbara Piga, Gloria Calderone, and Gabriele Pasqui, there is much more to observe. There are ethereal and intangible elements that encompass the emotional, cultural, and human aspects of urban spaces, the subjective and less tangible qualities that define how these spaces are experienced. Those constitute the second parameter. Finally, there is our own standpoint as scholars or planners. These remind us that we, as observers, bring our own cognitive biases, backgrounds, and interpretation into the act of observing. As Professor Gabriele Pasqui told us,
we have our own subjectivity because, in any case, we are human bodies in human spaces as the people we observe.
For us, all three of these elements must be integrated into our practice during our observation of the environment. When analyzing and documenting urban spaces, we need to balance these three perspectives to create a cohesive and comprehensive approach. Building on these premises, we framed the key research questions that guide this episode. So firstly, how should we observe urban spaces? What tools and methods can help us navigate this process? Secondly, urban studies, positioned at the intersection of technical and humanistic disciplines, constantly grapple with the challenge of balancing objective data, like quantitative metrics, with subjective experiences, such as individual experiences, as those result from perception, cognition, and evaluation, as we said previously. From this, we ask, should we encompass subjective experiences as well in the observation? And thus, are we truly paying attention to all the elements that define and shape urban spaces? And thirdly, should we strive to detach ourselves from our own perspectives, or are these perspectives an integral part of the observation process? If they are, how should we position ourselves as observers?
Urbinary.
It's pretty clear that quantitative observations are something that we, as planners and scholars, rely on heavily when analyzing urban spaces. And of course, these methods are essential, but more and more scholars and even citizens are realizing the need to observe spaces differently, more attentively and profoundly.
Yeah, exactly. Scholars have started questioning whether quantitative data alone is enough, and also citizens, often through local organizations, are demanding approaches that better consider their needs and emotions.
When we spoke with Barbara Piga, she emphasized this beautifully. She said,
For me, the practice of experiencing city is actually a crucial piece of the design process, since when you are in the environment, you can perceive it with not only all the senses, but even beyond senses. It's the experience itself is much more than considering only senses. And what you can understand, it's not only at the rational level, but it's something that goes beyond. So there are no simulation or representation of the environment that can substitute the on-site experience. So the in-motion, dynamic and evolving experience is something that you can actually grasp only if you are immersed in the environment. And the level of immersion also depends on to which extent the architect in this case is able to be there in that specific moment.
I found that so striking, and I think it also aligns with what Daphne described earlier. So the fact that the environment is not just some external territory surrounding us, but it's the medium in which we exist. So it's deeply intertwined with human behavior shaped by our needs, motivation, and intentions.
exactly. And we've felt this gap in our field of urban studies and planning. There's a tendency to analyze spaces from a distance, from maps, from data, but not by actually being there. Gloria explained this to us.
The body is not the subject, okay? But yes, the body is always the object of every project of space. It is always the recipient. Because at the end of the day, when urban designers project space, they are designing experiences of space. And every experience of space is an experience of bodies in space.
She went on to say that without the body, we can't truly comprehend the full range of information that constitutes a space. There is so much that simply isn't readable from a distance.
Right, and that brings us to the big question, how? How can we capture the subtle, embodied experiences of space? What methods can we use?
Exactly. Once we understood the need to incorporate people's feelings into spatial observation, we asked our interviewees for examples, and they gave us plenty of fascinating methods. Barbara pointed out something important.
And of course, in any case, senses are not the ones, only the ones we are used to think about. For instance, kinesthetic movement, so movement through the environment are crucial in understanding places.
We therefore sought to learn more about how we can observe and learn from space through our own movement within it.
Our interviewees shared several approaches based on walking. For instance, we can refer to 4 of them. Firstly, we can refer to community-led walks, which encourage people to share stories about their neighborhoods and finally aim to build collective knowledge. Secondly, we can refer to Jane's walks, which are inspired by Jane Jacobs, which is similar to the first one, so the community-led walks. But in this case, the researchers are walking alongside the community and try to learn directly from them. Thirdly, we can refer to public art-based walks, which intersect walking with art to engage more people and highlight cultural or aesthetic aspects that often go unnoticed. And fourthly, we can refer to toxic tours, which are walks that focus on giving a voice to marginalized communities and aim to emphasize the role of the senses and of the body.
Another interesting method Gloria mentioned is bodygraphy. The body interacts with the urban environment, and through this interaction, it incorporates urban conditions, like in a cartography. And also there is psychogeography experimentation, which Lizzy explained. This method connects emotion to places and aims to map them. It involves creating maps that record people's emotional experiences of space, as she put it.
Just to say how emotions not only are inside us, but they really have this, I would say, spatial, a geographical dimension.
Let's also recall the very interesting experience that Gabriele Pasqui shared with us.
I start from a short story. Some years ago, Stefano Boeri, that everybody knows, invited me in his course. And the idea of the course was to understand which were the consequences of observing the city from the point of view of the animals that live in the city. So birds, rats, and many other animals that we can encounter, insects and so on and so forth, many other animals that we encounter in our experience of the city. And the students were very smart, so they were able to have videos of the city from the point of view of the birds, from the point of view of the other animals, and it was wonderful. What I say is, okay, never forget that even if you say that this is the point of view of the animal, it's also your point of view. So we can catch a lot of information, suggestion, interpretation of the city through this kind of analysis, but we have to remember that this experience is always an experience that is translated in our languages, in our writings, in our forms of expression. So I think that from this point of view, our subjectivity cannot be put aside. We have to learn to consider this subjectivity, to use it in some sense, because it's impossible, I repeat, to leave it aside, but also to understand which role has in the transcription of the experiences of other people, social groups, species, and so on and so forth that we meet in the space. This is very difficult, because on one side we should do what we do in observing. On the other side, we should also be able to suspend our observation, our sight, thinking of the role that our languages, our forms of writings, and so on and so forth have in this description. I think that this is the very difficult and sharp situation in which we are.
The fact is that every researcher has his or her own opinions and beliefs, and therefore everyone acknowledges or ought to acknowledge his or her own bias. I once heard a wonderful metaphor about the role of subjectivity in research. So, in ideal circumstances, the researcher can be thought of as a camera whose film is clean of other images and has not been exposed to the light. But photographs are not taken by themselves. The direction from which the photograph is taken, the lighting of the subject, its focus, and of course the quality of the lenses and aperture, they all affect the quality of the photograph. its clarity, its color, its lighting, its contrast, and generally its composition and value. So the contribution and value of the researcher's opinion and experience in any fieldwork is of similar importance.
Urbinary.
All that's been said confirms how essential it is to observe not only the tangible, but also the intangible aspects of urban spaces. These observations allow us to capture the memories and meanings of a city, so things that go beyond distanced or plan view representations.
They help us identify the real issue and needs of people who inhabit a specific space. But this brings us to an important question. What is our role as observers when conducting research or even planning? Is it possible to be mere intermediaries, reporting quantitative data and qualitative observations based solely on the voices of those who live and experience space, while putting our own perspective aside?
For us, the answer is no. We're not just passive observers. As Kevin Lynch said, we're also participants in the urban stage, interacting with others and with the space itself. That's why it's crucial to consider our own bodies in these spaces. We contribute to the intangible data. We co-create these qualities alongside those whose observations we're gathering. As Gloria explained,
we can not only deal with the bodies of others. As a scholar, I must consider not only people, other people, citizens, users' bodies, but also my body.
Our observations, influenced by our own positionality, play a significant role in how we present the outcomes of our research. Ignoring this would mean losing an essential layer of understanding.
Urbinary.
So, we've reached the end of this journey. We've wandered through the systems of inquiry and research practices in urban studies, and we've tried to unpack the complexities of observation in urban spaces. Along the way, we've metaphorically stepped into Gloria's mind, Lizzy's, Gabriela's, and Barbara's. These are just a few of the many doors we could open to give an overview on the subject of observation.
As Lizzy pointed out, using rhetoric but making a valid point, we need to enshrine the importance of truly observing urban spaces into our systems of inquiry. She even joked about needing laws to give value to what she called small data. Of course, it's a joke, but it underscores how crucial it is to value those subtle, often invisible aspects of our observations.
So, reflecting on our journey, we'd like to share a few key takeaways. First, we need to strike a balance in how we use all the data available to us, both quantitative and qualitative. As Lizzy emphasized, these two categories complement each other. They help us identify mismatches in our understanding and to expand our perspectives.
The second takeaway is about interdisciplinarity. Many of the intangible data points we are trying to capture cannot be fully understood through the lens of urban planning and design or architecture alone, or at least not with the way these fields are currently structured. We need to collaborate with experts who study human emotion, sensation, perception, and experience. And for us, Barbara captured this perfectly.
When I was starting working with a psychologist, I immediately realized that there are a lot of, let's say, intuitive mental action that we, as architects and planners, we put in action that are completely coherent with the scientific construct they work on. That's amazing. And we, especially in Italy, we are not that used to collaborate together. And that's crazy because they work on the environment and the environmental perception. We work on the environment as well, and of course on, experience of people in places, but we do not interact too much together, which is a pity, because the understanding they have from the person perspective, it's very meaningful to us.
The final two takeaways regard urban scholars. First, we as planners and scholars need to become active agents in observation. We must engage with space, not by imposing our perspectives, but by balancing all the elements and diverse subjectivities that we encounter. And second, we need to be mindful of time. Urban spaces are not static. They evolve in response to natural, social, economic, and cultural shifts. We must recognize this dynamism and understand that our roles as observers may also change over time.
As Jacques Yonnet once said, observing the environment requires infinite tenderness and patience, sometimes to the point of despair, a delicately artless touch, and almost unconditional love. This is a poetic reminder of the respect and care we must bring to this process.
Urbinary.
Before concluding, we would like to let you know that if you want to learn more about our interviews and interviewees, you can visit our website, urbinary.com. There you can find a repository with the complete interviews featuring Gabriele, Lizzy, Barbara and Gloria. To conclude, we want to return to something Gabriele Pasqui said, referencing Charles Lindblom. So, observing, through the lens that we've discussed in this episode, creates a kind of common knowledge. It's built on scientific data, personal observations, and the intangible insights of others. This knowledge, Pasqui believes, has the potential to strengthen democracy.
And that's really what we are striving for with this podcast, to democratize urban studies. We hope that today's discussion is a small step in that direction.
Urbinary.
Our journey comes to an end, yet the question remains. As we navigated through Politecnico, finding our places, we reflect on the act of observation, how it unfolds within academia and beyond. Have we truly been attentive to the many interconnected elements that shape urban spaces, or do we perhaps only see fragments of the whole? But while our journey pauses here, a new one begins for Ruggero and Alessandro. So stay tuned for upcoming episode where we will follow them walking around urban studies in their episode titled Finding Our Place, Urban Studies and Planning, Ambiguous Boundaries, Contested Limits.
Urbinary.
Urbinary is produced in collaboration with Poliradio and the Department of Architecture and Urban Studies at Politecnico di Milano.